The American Claimant by Mark Twain. Chapter 18. Washington shuddered slightly at the suggestion. Then his face took on a dreamy look, and he dropped into a trance of thought. After a little, Sellers asked him what he was grinding in his mental mill. "Well, this. Have you got some secret project in your head which requires a Bank of England back of it to make it succeed?" The colonel showed lively astonishment, and said, "Why, Hawkins, are you a mind-reader?" "I? I never thought of such a thing." "Well, then how did you happen to drop onto that idea in this curious fashion? It's just mind-reading, that's what it is, though you may not know it, because I have got a private project that requires a Bank of England at its back. How could you divine that? What was the process? This is interesting." "There wasn't any process. A thought like this happened to slip through my head by accident. How much would make you or me comfortable? 100,000? Yet you are expecting 2 or 3 of these inventions of yours to turn out some billions of money, and you are wanting them to do that. If you wanted 10 millions, I could understand that. It's inside the human limits. But billions, that's clear outside the limits. There must be a definite project back of that somewhere." The Earl's interest and surprise augmented with every word, and when Hawkins finished, he said with strong admiration, "It's wonderfully reasoned out, Washington, it certainly is. It shows what I think is quite extraordinary penetration. For you've hit it. You've driven the center. You've plugged the bull's-eye of my dream. Now, I'll tell you the whole thing, and you'll understand it. I don't need to ask you to keep it to yourself, because you'll see that the project will prosper all the better for being kept in the background till the right time. Have you noticed how many pamphlets and books I've got lying around relating to Russia?" "Yes, I think most anybody would notice that, anybody who wasn't dead." "Well, I've been posting myself a good while. That's a great and splendid nation, and deserves to be set free." He paused, then added in a quite matter-of-fact way, "When I get this money, I'm going to set it free." "Great guns!" "Why, what makes you jump like that?" "Dear me, when you are going to drop a remark under a man's chair that is likely to blow him out through the roof, why don't you put some expression, some force, some noise into it that will prepare him? You shouldn't flip out such a gigantic thing as this in that colorless kind of a way. You do jolt a person up so. Go on, now. I'm all right again. Tell me all about it. I'm all interest, yes, and sympathy, too." "Well, I've looked the ground over, and concluded that the methods of the Russian patriots, while good enough considering the way the boys are hampered, are not the best, at least not the quickest. They are trying to revolutionize Russia from within. That's pretty slow, you know, and liable to interruption all the time, and is full of perils for the workers. Do you know how Peter the Great started his army? He didn't start it on the family premises under the noses of the Sterlitzes. No, he started it away off yonder, privately. Only just 1 regiment, you know, and he built to that. The first thing the Sterlitzes knew, the regiment was an army, their position was turned, and they had to take a walk. Just that little idea made the biggest and worst of all the despotisms the world has seen. The same idea can unmake it. I'm going to prove it. I'm going to get out to one side and work my scheme the way Peter did." "This is mighty interesting, Rossmore. What is it you are going to do?" "I am going to buy Siberia and start a republic." "There! Bang you go again, without giving any notice. Going to buy it?" "Yes, as soon as I get the money. I don't care what the price is, I shall take it. I can afford it, and I will. Now then, consider this, and you've never thought of it, I'll warrant. Where is the place where there is 25 times more manhood,
pluck, true heroism, unselfishness, devotion to high and noble ideals, adoration of liberty, wide education and brains per thousand of population than any other domain in the whole world can show."
"Siberia."
"Right."
"It is true. It certainly is true, but I never thought of it before."
"Nobody ever thinks of it, but it's so just the same. In those mines and prisons are gathered together the very finest and noblest and capablest multitude of human beings that God is able to create. Now, if you had that kind of a population to sell, would you offer it to a despotism? No, the despotism has no use for it. You would lose money. A despotism has no use for anything but human cattle. But suppose you want to start a republic."
"Yes, I see. It's just the material for it."
"Well, I should say so. There's Siberia with just the very finest and choicest material on the globe for a republic, and more coming all the time, don't you see? It is being daily, weekly, monthly recruited by the most perfectly devised system that has ever been invented, perhaps. By this system the whole of the 100 millions of Russia are being constantly and patiently sifted by myriads of trained experts, spies appointed by the Emperor personally. And whenever they catch a man, woman, or child that has got any brains or education or character, they ship that person straight to Siberia. It is admirable. It is wonderful. It is so searching and so effective that it keeps the general level of Russian intellect and education down to that of the Czar."
"Come, that sounds like exaggeration."
"Well, it's what they say, anyway. But I think myself it's a lie, and it doesn't seem right to slander a whole nation that way, anyhow. Now, then, you see what the material is. They're in Siberia for a republic."
He paused, and his breast began to heave and his eye to burn under the impulse of strong emotion. Then his words began to stream forth with constantly increasing energy and fire, and he rose to his feet as if to give himself larger freedom.
"The minute I organize that republic, the light of liberty, intelligence, justice, humanity, bursting from it, flooding from it, flaming from it, will concentrate the gaze of the whole astonished world as upon the miracle of a new sun. Russia's countless multitudes of slaves will rise up and march eastward, with that great light transfiguring their faces as they come, and far back of them you will see— what will you see? A vacant throne in an empty land. It can be done, and by God, I will do it."
He stood a moment, bereft of earthly consciousness by his exaltation. Then consciousness returned, bringing him a slight shock, and he said with grave earnestness,
"I must ask you to pardon me, Major Hawkins. I have never used that expression before, and I beg you will forgive it this time."
Hawkins was quite willing.
"You see, Washington, it is an error which I am by nature not liable to. Only excitable people, impulsive people, are exposed to it. But the circumstances of the present case, I being a Democrat by birth and preference, and an aristocrat by inheritance and relish—"
The Earl stopped suddenly, his frame stiffened, and he began to stare speechless through the curtainless window. Then he pointed, and gasped out a single rapturous word.
"Look!"
"What is it, Colonel?"
"It."
"No."
"Sure as you're born. Keep perfectly still. I'll apply the influence. I'll turn on all my force. I've brought it thus far. I'll fetch it right into the house. You'll see."
He was making all sorts of passes in the air with his hands.
"There! Look at that. I've made it smile. See?"
Quite true. Tracy, out for an afternoon stroll, had come unexpectedly upon his family arms displayed upon this shabby house-front. The hatchments made him smile, which was nothing. They had made the neighborhood cats do that.
Look, Hawkins, look. I'm drawing it over."
"You're drawing it sure, Rossmore. If I ever had any doubts about materialization, they're gone now, and gone for good. Oh, this is a joyful day." Tracy was sauntering over to read the door-plate. Before he was halfway over he was saying to himself,
"Why, manifestly, these are the American Claimant's quarters. It's coming right along. I'll slide down and pull it in. You follow after me."
Sellers, pale and a good deal agitated, opened the door and confronted Tracy. The old man could not at once get his voice. Then he pumped out a scattering and hardly coherent salutation, and followed it with,
"Walk in. Walk right in, Mr.
Tracy. Howard Tracy."
"Tracy, thanks. Walk right in. You're expected."
Tracy entered, considerably puzzled, and said, "Expected? I think there must be some mistake."
"Oh, I judge not," said Sellers,
who, noticing that Hawkins had arrived, gave him a sidewise glance intended to call his close attention to a dramatic effect which he was proposing to produce by his next remark. Then he said, slowly and impressively,
"I am you know who."
To the astonishment of both conspirators, the remark produced no dramatic effect at all, for the newcomer responded with a quite innocent and unembarrassed air. "No, pardon me, I don't know who you are. I only suppose, but no doubt correctly, that you are the gentleman whose title is on the door-plate."
"Right, quite right. Sit down, pray sit down."
The Earl was rattled, thrown off his bearings. His head was in a whirl. Then he noticed Hawkins standing apart and staring idiotically at what to him was the apparition of a defunct man, and a new idea was born to him. He said to Tracy briskly,
"But 1,000 pardons, dear sir, I am forgetting courtesies due to a guest and stranger. Let me introduce my friend, General Hawkins. General Hawkins, our new senator from the latest and grandest addition to the radiant galaxy of sovereign states, Cherokee Strip."
To himself, "That name will shrivel him up." But it didn't, in the least, and the colonel resumed the introduction piteously disheartened and amazed.
"Senator Hawkins, Mr. Howard Tracy of,
England."
"England? Why, that's in—"
"England, yes, native of England."
"Recently from there?"
"Yes, quite recently," said the colonel to himself. "This phantom lies like an expert. Purifying this kind by fire don't work. I'll sound him a little further, give him another chance or two to work his gift." Then aloud, with deep irony,
"Visiting our great country for recreation and amusement, no doubt. I suppose you find that traveling in the majestic expanses of our far West
"I
is—"
haven't been West, and haven't been devoting myself to amusement with any sort of exclusiveness, I assure you. In fact, to merely live, an artist has got to work, not play." "Artist," said Hawkins to himself, thinking of the rifled bank. "That is a name for it."
"Are you an artist?"
asked the colonel, and added to himself, "Now I'm going to catch him."
"In a humble way, yes." "What line?" pursued the sly veteran.
"Oils." "I've got him," said Sellers to himself. Then aloud,
"This is fortunate. Could I engage you to restore some of my paintings that need that attention?"
"I shall be very glad. Pray let me see them." No shuffling, no evasion, no embarrassment, even under this crucial test. The colonel was nonplussed. He led Tracy to a chromo which had suffered damage in a former owner's hands through being used as a lamp-mat, and said, with a flourish of his hand toward the picture,
"This Del Sarto—"
"Is that a Del Sarto?" The colonel bent a look of reproach upon Tracy, allowed it to sink home, then resumed as if there had been no interruption.
"This Del Sarto is perhaps the only original of that sublime master in our country. You see yourself that the work is of such exceeding delicacy that the risk could—would you mind giving me a little example of what you could do before we—"
"Cheerfully, cheerfully. I will copy one of these marvels." water-color materials, relics of Miss Sally's college life, were brought. Tracy said he was better in oils, but would take a chance with these. So he was left alone. He began his work, but the attractions of the place were too strong for him, and he got up and went drifting about, fascinated, also amazed. End of chapter 18.